Hey everyone, welcome back to What the Theory with Joel. I'm Joel, and today I'm going to be talking about habit. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about a small portion of something that Immanuel Kant wrote about. That name is very tricky to say. Immanuel Kant wrote about how man is an animal in search of a master. Now, I first read that through Slavoj Zizek, who sort of made a joke that Kant was the first sadomasochist theorist. Because essentially what he was saying is that as human beings, we're consistently seeking for our betters. We're always seeking for someone to tell us what to do. We need instruction. Now that ties into the idea that, you guys all know the joke I always tell about the chicken. I'm not going to say it again because people are going to get much tired of it. But it's the understanding that as a historical subject, as human beings, it's not enough for us to think that we know who we are. It's not enough for us to say, well, I'm Joel, I'm a CEO, I'm good at, digital financial services, and, have that become an opinion that is unshakable. As much as we talk about it being unshakable, it doesn't mean that it is essentially not psychotic to think that way. So the difference between hysteria and psychosis, this is a very layman's view of it, is that someone who's hysterical is always asking the question, who am I for the other? Why am I who you say I am? So when someone says to you that, oh, you are a friend who just had a baby and the baby is called Aisha. So they call her Mama Aisha. And she's always like, why is that who I am? Why are you saying that that's me? And there's always that tension. Yes, she gave birth to her, but she's almost saying that, why am I what you say that I am? Now, from the psychotic's point of view, it's called psychotic foreclosure. Now, psychotic foreclosure means that you stop wondering whether there is a distance between you as you experience yourself and how others experience you. You're so sure that everyone experiences you in the same way you experience yourself. Now you can see that with people who, for instance, have religious experiences, who come and tell you, I am the chosen of God. I am here. I'm the instrument that is going to bring salvation. Like at that point, you can't even talk to that person. And the process of psychoanalysis is to try and get you from psychotic foreclosure and induce hysteria into you. Now, inducing hysteria, for instance, in my case, when I went in for treatment, I was sort of thinking maybe I'm an imposter. I think everyone feels imposter syndrome to a certain extent. It wasn't it wasn't a deliberate thought that was in my mind. It's just always I would think, I think I know what I'm doing, but I'm not quite sure if it is. And so I would act maybe in faith. And I thought maybe there are people who are more sure than I am. And I would always look at people who seemed to be effortless in the way they would do their work or the way they would approach certain projects. And it seemed like they were so sure of who they were. And when I was speaking to the analyst, one of the things that he said to me was that, the worst form of therapy would be to try and convince you that you're just as good as everyone else, you're quite solid in what you're doing, read you back your CV and then make you sort of confident in yourself. Now, not that confidence is a bad thing, but that pathway towards confidence is one in which you continually have to, almost ratchet yourself up. You have to hype yourself up back to that position rather than you say, well, listen, all of us, you traverse the symptom and you realize that almost everyone experiences that feeling of being an imposter. Everyone has that imposter syndrome. So the best thing for you to then do is to be the best kind of imposter of who you think you can be. I tell this joke usually when I'm brought up to speak at an event. Again, this is a joke that Slavoj Zizek always uses. And that's like yesterday I was at a leadership conference and they, read my CV. How many years of doing financial inclusion? How many years of doing this? He's a seasoned professional. They start calling you seasoned when you're getting old. It's like you start sounding delicious, a seasoned practitioner. Now, when they were saying all of that, the instinct I had is, I know who I am and I'm hearing what they are saying about me. And there is a gap between me as I experience myself and that ideal version of me, the version of me that I put out, say on LinkedIn, the version of me that I put out in terms of my public image, which is sort of sanitized. It's not perfect, but it's a little bit more of an ideal that I would want to be portrayed as. Now, the name for that gap between how I really am and the ideal is symbolic castration. Now, the reason it's called symbolic castration is you don't have to lose the member. You know, when you think of castration, it means they've chopped your member and that's it, you don't have the power. But symbolically would mean that you still have the member, you're just questioning whether it has the power to do what it's supposed to do. You still possess it and you're not able to function fully. Now, as a subject, if you think about that as who we are as subjects, human subjects are always caught in between who we are and who we are supposed to be. And we're constantly trying to prove to ourselves and to other people that we are great. Now that's where Kant comes into the picture and says, well, we seek freedom to become ourselves. But the pathway towards freedom, the pathway towards making ourselves better is paradoxically for us to embrace necessity. It is for us to embrace duty. It is for us to find a master that we can follow. Now by master, he's sort of talking about someone who crafts an ideology for you, someone who gives you a narrative that can allow you to structure your life. We often think that we can do that for ourselves, but most of the time what we're doing is picking up ideas from people who either lived before us or thoughts and moods in the times that we live in. Like Hegel argued that if you went back in time and talked to people 200 years ago, those people, even though they structurally have a similar mind to yours, like functionally they have a brain that's just like yours that can take information like the way you do, their ideas, their way of framing the world would be so completely different from yours as to you wouldn't even know how to even have a point of connection. We look at the past from where we are and we infer that people thought the way we do. And if we were to go into the future, people would not understand even how we are speaking. So the fact that we are living, I guess, in a communal sense and we have language means that we're dependent on the other. We are always dependent on someone else to sort of help structure who we are. We are interdependent. Now, when it comes to the episode I was speaking about before, when I was talking about lust, or when I was talking about how there's a death drive, there's something within us that is consistently going towards repetition and taking us towards failure, and that there is enjoyment in that. That's what I call the fruitful failure. A good example that I might give of that is friendship. So I have friendships that defy utility. There are some friendships that don't give me immediate pleasure. They don't give me benefit in terms of we're not sharing resources with each other. They're not, I guess, sort of helping me progress in my career. Like there is no utility per se that you can put a firm picture to, and nevertheless it continues. And the tension that's built up and the release anytime we meet up or there's been a gap in which we've not had conversations, like that repeated process is not something that I can say, well, now our friendship is complete and we're done. No, it keeps it keeps going. And the way I realize that that works for me is by seeing that pattern. I put myself in a habit of seeing those people every so often. So the last time I was on holiday, I had about a week off and I planned for 2 days to do nothing. By midday of the following day, I felt horrendous. And maybe I'm odd in this way, you can tell me in the comments. I need to structure. I find happiness through structure, through repetition, through knowing that I brush my teeth every day. I eat at this time, I sleep at this time, I speak to these number of people, this is when I'm on the phone. Like the more I structure my life, the more I take away the anxiety of having to think about what I'm going to do. It's akin to, I think it was Albert Einstein, even more deplorable, Mark Zuckerberg, who said that they remove the decision of the things that they're going to wear every day. They just wear the same thing every day. They try and routinize their life to such an extent that they allow for freedom. The freedom that they then enjoy is, I don't have to think about that. Like my mind is now focused on other things. I have sort of automated my life to a certain extent. Now, that automation is you picking a master. You're picking something, a principle that you are going to live for. And it is in living that way that we find true freedom. Now, let me talk a little bit about freedom. I think when we think of freedom, one of the jokes Zizek has is about the movie V for Vendetta. And his jokes, I think rather crassly sometimes, that he would sell his mother into slavery to see V for Vendetta Part 2. And if you remember that movie, V for Vendetta, at some point, the V who inspires people to rise up and go against the totalitarian leaders that are over them. The movie ends when they're storming the offices and taking over, and the people are now rising up to take charge of their own lives. Now, in that motion, you realize that most movies, most narratives give us the feeling of rising up and defeating evil. Very few times do you see what happens the day after the revolution, because it's almost easier for us to think about, hey, I need to resist this master, because when I'm resisting the master, I have a narrative, I have value. But also in a scary way, and maybe this is a little bit more cynical for people who are trying to do emancipatory politics or people who are trying to relieve ourselves of pain, do we really know what we want? Are we ready to have masters? Are we ready to become the masters of our own destiny? The postmodern critique of it is that it's easier for us to just simply have a release of tension. And think of a Marvel movie, for instance. In the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, you have superheroes who rise up and tell you all these, they teach you about the importance of valor, of sacrifice, and all of that. But what fundamentally never changes is the world order. Captain America is always going to be fighting. Batman is always going to have villains. There is no structural change. There is no going, hey, maybe I'm fighting symptoms. I should be addressing the major issue. Because to do that, you would have to have a complete paradigm shift. And you would then have to risk the fact that you would no longer have an excuse. And I think people who are in Gen Z and some millennials, it's a little trendy now to sort of decry capitalism. Of course, it's a system that we live under and is quite awful. But I think at some point there's a temptation to have that become like this specter over us. And I talk about fruitful failure all the time, and I think sometimes you look at it as this is failure, and I'm trying to have the fruit and the enjoyment of I don't have to address it. Lacan had something similar to this when he was talking about the 1960 protests in France. Those were student protests who are, sort of trying to get the government to give them a much better stake in life, to make sure that French society was a little bit more egalitarian. And his critique of them was that it's almost like the critique that was held for the Wall Street movement, the Wall Street protests. Even more similarly on Twitter in Uganda, the very great work that Jimmy Spire was starting in terms of those exhibitions. I saw a thread that was, sort of saying, okay, fine, you've started this thing, but it's almost that there is an exhaustion within it. Like, what happens the next day? We are all good at sort of exposing and saying, yeah, let's expose this rot, but then what happens after? What plan do we have? What is it that we're going to do? What master are we ready to serve? And I think, to me, what I'm taking as a criticism is, yeah, I can criticize the system, but what is my plan? What is the way forward? Now, that's not to say let's stop criticizing the system. That's the last thing I'm going to say. I'm just saying that as we do that, how are we going to have a collective approach towards saying we want to have a better world? I'm 38 years old now. I'm old enough. This guy gave me the Kevin Hart. Damn! Being 38, I'm now old enough that I was at this event yesterday and I realized that people who are my age are now sort of running things. People who used to tell me that they've put medicine in their juice and so they can't give me some are now in charge of running teams. And yet we are repeating the same patterns, I fear. The things we complained about, we're just, here comes the new boss, same as the old boss. And I just wonder then if, our children are going to do the same thing, if their children are going to do the same thing. And we almost have, like what Plato was saying, that if you don't pay attention to politics, if you don't pay attention to the people who are ruling over you, you will be dominated by the people that you despise. Now, he sort of said that we don't want that, but I think in some cases we do, because there is some relief in going, those guys are idiots. And you don't have to then master the way of saying, well, what would you do in their stead? And I think that's the request to our generation. How are we going to master the animal part of ourselves, the part of ourselves that just wants freedom, without responsibility? The best way to embrace freedom, if you watch the episode that I did on tattoos, I was talking about the Sisyphus tattoo on my chest. And the reason I like that tattoo is, he embraced his fate. Now, that doesn't mean that you go fatally into the night. No, it means that you tie yourself to something. Freedom is not doing what you want, it's wanting what you do. If I talk about love, for instance, love is the freest thing that you can ever do. But when you are in love, when you are pursuing it, it doesn't feel free. It feels like you have no choice. Like, this is why I say love is a disaster. Every time I've fallen in love, it's not like I'm going, hey, I can just take it or leave it. No, I'm feeling compelled that I have to do it. When I do things for my family, when I do things for my friends, I try to tell them that I'm not doing it simply out of sentiment. It is, I must do it. I cannot exist without having to do it. So necessity is the realization of our freedom. And so tying ourselves, coming from Kant's point of view, where he says we are, in a sadomasochistic way, trying to seek masters. What we want is a master of our own choosing. We want to choose the master that we're going to serve. And that's why slavery is such a terrible thing, because it takes away the choice that we have. The choices that we seek for, the freedom that we choose, that we seek for, is meant for us to be able to not just say, oh, I'm free and I'm sitting here before the anxiety of freedom. I am taking that freedom and making a firm choice about it. So as far as it stands, I think, to me, the lesson in this is that what are we choosing? What are we choosing to be our masters? Because you have to have a master. Without that, it means that the most ideological position that you can be in is to say, well, I have no master. I just follow my own rules. If you look deep enough, whatever is rolling around in your head is social. It's social because it was created with other people. And so you might be following a process that you're just not aware of. And that's probably the worst form to be in. The worst ideological position to be in is one in which you think that you are free of ideology. We all live in ideology. It is not a normative claim. It is simply asking, what is the ideology that you're following leading you towards? What kind of freedom are you embracing? The last thing I'll say, as someone who's worked in the corporate world, for people who are anti-corporate, this is the one thing I'll say about corporate life that's quite impressive, is I found that there's a lot of narratives about people who are capitalist, who are corporate, that they're selfish and they're, sort of hedonistic and they're trying to enjoy. Even amongst us, we say, yeah, we want to have a good time, we want to maximize life. But what I found is people are willing to sacrifice to such a degree. They sacrifice the time at home, they sacrifice their health, they are following a principle to such an extent it's almost religious, to create value. In fact, the people who might be enjoying the most bread that's being won are the people who are just close to that capitalist, the person who's working to generate something. So there's a higher principle that someone follows. And even as consumers, we tend to pursue things to no end. We keep, how can I say, there's always some new iPhone to take. There's always some new product that you can always consume. And we sort of talk about it and laugh. And that ironic distance, irony is a dangerous thing, because irony allows you to do something while thinking that you're not really doing it. Like, I'm doing this ironically. I was watching, what's that show on Netflix? Too Hot to Handle. And I was like, I'm watching this ironically. But I was still watching it. Then I was like, wait a minute, I'm still watching this show. Like, it allows me to have a sort of disavowal. And that's where I think Kant is saying, that name is very, that is sort of saying that you need to find a master. You need to select that master. Otherwise, a master will find you. And when that master finds you, you will obey a principle. You will live according to a certain ideology that you yourself are not aware of. You will have a disavowal, which is an ironic distance, just like we talk about, say, the irony of democracy. Like, many people I meet don't really believe in democracy. They're like, yeah, every man vote, but they secretly think that if there was a strong man who could just take over. But effectively, democracy keeps growing. So even if we do it ironically, we're still practicing it. Or the famous joke of Santa Claus. How does the idea of Santa Claus keep reproducing itself? Because the adults don't believe in Santa Claus. I mean, if I was to ask Alan here, does he buy the gifts or does Santa Claus buy them? Of course, he'll say, don't be stupid, I buy the gifts. Then you might find, if I went and asked his kids, like, hey, who's buying these gifts? Maybe if they're younger, they'll say Santa Claus. But there's a certain bridged area where they go, well, of course we know Dad buys, and he's telling us that it's Santa Claus. And we don't want to disappoint Dad. So you have two unbelievers in the thing, but the belief is staying there. Like, Santa Claus will keep maintaining itself. That's what I mean in terms of you can follow a principle without necessarily believing it, but your actions are bringing them to pass. So the challenge I have for you is just look at your actions and see, what master are you serving? What ideology are you following? Because everyone is following an ideology. The worst ideological stance you can ever take is to think that you're outside of it. That's why The Matrix, as great as it is the kind of movie that The Matrix would create. It's the kind of thing that will tell you you can escape the Matrix. The real Matrix is not something that you can see or get out of. It's only something that you can try to understand and then restructure. You have to have another ideology. You can't replace it with nothing. Yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed this episode. We talked about Immanuel Kant. We talked about, why are you laughing at the name Immanuel Kant? We talked about Immanuel Kant, about man is an animal in search of a master. We talked about how freedom is realized necessity, or necessity is realized freedom. And then lastly, we talked about, the fact that you have to figure out what master you're going to be serving, what ideology you're going to be following after, and gave examples of, say, in the corporate life, that's something that living in this world, think differently about corporate life. As someone who's living in it, I found some amazing people living in it, and usually when I speak to them, they have a different view of what they're actually doing. They say things like, I'm being pragmatic, just being smart. But all of us collectively are creating this system that, if you look at it from a different perspective, is actually quite religious. The creation of value. Every day we walk around trying to make more and more money. And whatever we have as a disavowal, whatever ironic distance we have to that, is just the ideology that allows us to do that without feeling bad deep down inside. Thank you, as always, for joining and for listening to What the Theory. Let me know if you're enjoying these kinds of discussions, if I should go deeper. That's what she said. Thank you so much, and cheers. Take care of yourself.